Once at a reading for a poet and essayist, Ross Gay, a man from the audience rose to ask a question. Ross Gay describes it like this. When all of this is going on, he held his hands up as though to imply war, famine, people all over the world in cages or concentration camps, some of them children, disease, sorrow immense and imperturbable, it only getting worse and worse. The dude had big hands. Why would you write about joy? This quote comes from Ross Gay's book called Inciting Joy, that I'll try to prop up here, we'll see. His book is an exploration of the sources and the results of joy. I spent a minute or two considering just reading excerpts from it to you today because it's a sermon in itself, and I commend it and his other work to you. In this book, he goes on to say, the implication, of course, is that joy does not have anything to do with everything in that guy's big hands, or even that joy is the opposite of what's in there, which I guess is a reasonable notion, given how joy is often imagined to be the result of organizing our closets and bookshelves, or getting the new Tesla, or winning the big game, or acing the test, or getting a promotion, or getting our dishes sparkling clean. Given that joy is often imagined as the result of some accomplishment or acquisition, something nice that you get out there and do, something nice you go get yourself. In the next paragraphs, he describes our tendency to think of joy as if it were a room at the top of the stairs. This room snug with every good and nice and cozy thing, where comforting food and uplifting music and comfy furniture exist, a place to go and curl up and read. In his imagining of this room, this joy is completely separated from sorrow. In fact, there are locks on the doors of joy's room to keep out the heartbreak that lives somewhere else, maybe in the filthy back room of the basement. This thinking, Gay says, is a kid's fantasy that we grown-ups often seem seduced by as often as kids, where we imagine any emotion discrete from any other. Gay says, it strikes me as a particularly dangerous fantasy, by which I mean it is sad, that because we think of joy as meaning without pain or without sorrow, which, to reiterate, our consumer culture has us believing is a state that we could buy, not only is it sometimes considered unserious or frivolous to talk about joy, but this definition also suggests that someone might be able to live without or free of heartbreak and sorrow, which, he says, I'm pretty sure you only get to do if you have no relationships, love nothing, are a sociopath, or maybe if you're enlightened and beyond all that. He says, I don't know about you, but I check none of those boxes. He then goes on to tell a story, which I would say is a parable, about people gathering for a party, bringing along their sorrows. Their sorrows in this parable are a visible presence next to them at the party. And people at this party introduce their sorrows to one another. And through that, their relationships get deeper. Through that, sometimes some space begins to show between the sorrow and the person who brought it. The sorrows are still there within arm's reach, and they're known by all, but with that little bit of space, the people have the opportunity to focus on something else. And as the party continues, the people feel that bond growing between them, because now they know the other people's sorrows, and their own sorrows are known by others. Ross Gay calls this bond that forms solidarity. And in this parable, the people's solidarity incites a kind of joy. And he says this is a virtuous cycle. In the same way that last week I talked about how hope leads to action, which leads to hope, which leads to action, Gay says solidarity incites joy, and joy incites solidarity, and on and on. And here's how he says it. He's a poet, and his words are so beautiful I can't resist. He writes, my hunch is that joy is an ember for or a precursor to wild and unpredictable and transgressive and unboundaried solidarity. And that solidarity might incite further joy, which might incite further solidarity, and on and on. My hunch is that joy, emerging from our common sorrow, might draw us together. It might depolarize us and de-atomize us enough that we can consider what in common it is that we love. And though attending to what we hate in common is too often all the rage, and happens also to be very big business, noticing what we love in common and studying that might help us survive. It's why I think of joy, which gets us to love, as being a practice of survival. The poets that we've heard besides Ross Gay this morning expressed variations on this viewpoint. Anne Sexton takes time to notice every little part of her morning routine: the towel with which she dries her hair and body, the kettle that makes her coffee, the table, the chapel of eggs, she calls it, her chair, what she calls the holy birds outside her window. She realizes the joy that is available to her in each of these items and moments. She notices these reasons for joy, and as do the owls in our story today. Anne Sexton says she paints a thank you on her palm and ends with these lines: "The joy that isn't shared, I've heard, dies young." The other poem from Rosemary Watola Tromer also includes that idea that joy should be shared. She describes scattering exclamation points of amazement and joy, like apple seeds, like Johnny Appleseed. She knows that some of these exclamation points will blow away and some will dry up, but some will take root and grow more fruit in what she calls exuberant groves, orchards of amazement for those who come after. Those who experience the fruits of these groves and orchards will be motivated to gather seeds to scatter themselves. This describes a way of living that leaves behind an expanding, fruitful legacy of joy, which seems to me like a pretty good way to live a life. But besides making a life more joyful for yourself when you live this way, an important reason for living a joy-filled life is that joy is also resistance. In a society where the dominant narrative is grim and joyless, where we are told to be afraid of so many things, be afraid of anyone who's different from us, when we're flooded with propaganda filled with lies about hellhole countries and crime-ridden cities, when we have reason to be afraid of who might be the next target, joy is resistance. Like we sang, this joy that I have, did the world give it to us? No. The world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. And just like joy is resistance, sometimes resistance is joy. When thinking of this, I often think of that children's book that you may have seen before, Tarina Reed, called White Flower. Does anybody remember this? It's based on a true story of a town where the KKK had a rally scheduled, and the people in the town were not happy about this, and so they got together and they organized a counter-protest. Whenever the Klan said, "White power," the counter-protesters shouted, "White flower," and they threw flour in the air. The Klan tried again, "White power," and this time the counter-protesters shouted, "Wife power," and the women showed their muscles, and they were applauded. The third time, the counter-protesters tossed actual white flowers into the air. Eventually, the Klan gave up and went back to where they came from. Just recently, I saw a photo of something sort of like this idea that was being circulated on social media. It shows 7 police officers standing in a formation, and next to them, a group of about the same number of people dressed as clowns, also in formation. They are copying the officer's stance. This photo is of members of what was called the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army. They were active in the UK in the early 2000s. They were trained to participate in protests, and instead of meeting the police with anger or just ignoring them, the clown army engaged with the police, treating them like friends, inviting them to play. This response was often confusing for the police. And it brought joy and it brought courage to the protesters. Their Wikipedia page includes this explanation that I found delightful. We are clandestine, so that's the first part of their name, because we refuse the spectacle of celebrity, and without real names, faces, or noses, we show that our words, dreams, and desires are more important than our biographies. We are insurgent because we have risen up from nowhere and are everywhere, and because an insurrection of the imagination is irresistible. We are rebels because we love life and happiness more than revolution, and because while no revolution is ever complete, rebellions continue forever. We are clowns because inside everyone is a lawless clown trying to escape, and because nothing undermines authority like holding it up to ridicule. We are an army because we live on a planet in permanent war, a war of money against life, of profit against dignity, of progress against the future. We are an army because a war that gorges itself on death and blood and excretes money and toxins deserves an obscene body of deviant soldiers. I found that delightful, and if anybody wants to start a clown army, let me know. Let's do it. Okay. This kind of comedy, and especially satire, it's a way of speaking truth to power. Satire, which often deals with topics that are serious and worrisome, entertains us. And because it entertains us, it tends to engage us more than serious speech making. If a satirist holds a person who is frightening up to ridicule, those listening have the opportunity to get a little distance between them and their fears. And laughing together, just like singing together, creates shared emotional experiences, and it builds bonds of solidarity among people. I find that in challenging times like the ones we're living in, our joy comes often not because of the sorrowful and scary stuff that's happening, but in spite of it. Ross Gay's book contains 14 chapters, or as he refers to it, 14 incitements to joy. These incitements include dancing and school and gratitude and the garden and laughter and pickup basketball, among others. But running throughout is the idea that our joy comes from caring for one another, or in another word, solidarity. Solidarity, living in a way that helps others and also being helped by others, brings joy. Siding with love wherever you can brings joy. Doing something challenging in the service of justice brings joy. If your life feels a little low on joy right now, you can care for others, side with love, and act in the service of justice by showing up at noon on October 18th for the No Kings rally. We cannot escape sorrow, for we have relationships. We love people and things, and we are, I hope, not sociopaths. These qualities of life open us to sorrow, and they also open us even wider to joy. Together, in solidarity, may we find ways to continue to resist the push toward a joyless, authoritarian future, and notice those things that already bring us joy. May we focus on what we love together and help the things that we love to grow. May we find joy. May we find hope. May we find peace. May we find love. Amen.